15 meters of concrete separated my garage from the street. In that space, which was meant to be just a regular entrance, I witnessed everything over the past few months. Delivery drivers pulling risky maneuvers, teenagers doing donuts, and even a couple having a heated argument that blocked my access for almost 20 minutes. I've been living in this upscale middle-class condo in Austin for 3 years. I bought the house when prices were still reasonable, before the shopping center on the other side of the street got expanded. It was a quiet place with sensible rules and neighbors who respected each other's space. I work remotely as an IT consultant, so I spend a lot of time at home. This is where I first noticed the growing invasion onto my property. The mall brought progress, but it also brought a constant stream of people who figured out my entrance was perfect for quick maneuvers. It was almost as if my house had been designated, without my permission, as an extension of the public parking lot. Things finally reached a breaking point when an SUV hit the trash can beside the entrance, and the driver sped off without leaving any contact information. Our homeowners association, HOA, used to be pretty reasonable until about 6 months ago. That's when Diane Hartman, 52, a former real estate broker, took over as president after an election that only saw 23% participation from residents. Since then, small changes started happening. Fines for shrubs being just half a centimeter too high, a ban on door decorations with more than 3 colors, and surprise inspections of trash cans. After months of dealing with intruders at my entrance, I decided it was time for a permanent fix. An automatic sliding gate. Subscribe to the channel and hit like for more stories like this. I checked all the HOA rules before installing the gate. I read the manual 3 times, looked up the city code, and hired a reputable company that had already installed similar gates in another condo managed by the same people. The gate was sleek, made of black wrought iron, and it fit the house's style perfectly. I got all the necessary permits and even informed the nearest neighbors, who thought the idea was pretty sensible. The morning after the installation, while I was having coffee on the porch, I spotted Diane in her full workout gear, cap, huge sunglasses, and a running watch that beeped every 5 minutes. She stopped right in front of my house, took the phone out of her neon pink fanny pack, and started snapping photos of the gate from every angle. She didn't say hello, or even look at me, even when I raised my hand in a hesitant wave. 3 days later, an official HOA letter showed up in my mailbox. Notice of violation. Unauthorized structure, the red header read. According to the document, my gate was violating the community's aesthetic harmony and had to be removed within 48 hours, or I'd face daily fines. I tried to talk it out. I baked some homemade cookies, my grandma's award-winning recipe, and went over to Diane's place. When she opened the door, her eyes went from the cookies to my face, and her professional smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm not interested in bribes," she said, refusing the basket. "The manual is clear about structural modifications. But I checked all the rules. The gate complies with—" "I'm the one interpreting these rules now," she interrupted. "And I'm telling you, it doesn't." A week later, I received an email calling for an emergency HOA meeting to discuss serious violations of community guidelines. The email was sent at 10:47 p.m. for a meeting scheduled at 10 a.m. the next day, right when most residents would be at work. At the meeting, only 7 homeowners showed up, besides me and the HOA board. Diane showed a PowerPoint titled, "Preserving Our Values," featuring photos of my gate that looked edited to be much darker and more imposing than it really was. "This kind of unauthorized modification can lower our property values by up to 15%, she stated firmly, without citing any source. "We will now vote to implement daily fines of $1,500 until the structure is removed." I presented all my documentation, permits, highlighted excerpts from the HOA manual, and municipal approvals. 2 neighbors backed me up, mentioning the traffic issues caused by the mall. But Diane quickly shut the discussion down. "The vote is final. 5 in favor, 3 against. The fines start tomorrow." In the days that followed, I got emails almost every day. Some were sent at 3 a.m., and all carried an increasingly threatening tone. "Don't force the HOA to take harsher measures," one email warned. Another mentioned that the association had hired West Valley Security Services to ensure compliance with our guidelines. It was Memorial Day. Most of the neighbors were either traveling or at family barbecues. I was working in my home office when the security system alerted me to movement in the front yard. On the cameras, I saw 3 black SUVs pulling up in front of my house. 6 men in dark blue uniforms got out, one of them holding a German Shepherd on a short leash. The leader, a stocky guy in his 40s, rang the doorbell over and over while the others surrounded the garage gate with tools that looked like electric saws and bolt cutters. On his chest, a gold emblem read, West Valley Security Services. I answered through the intercom, trying to stay calm. Mr. Anderson? We're here to remove the non-compliant structure by order of the HOA, the man said. You don't have the authority to do that. This gate was legally installed. We have direct orders from Ms. Hartman to take down the structure. If you interfere, I'll have my team take the necessary measures. The dog barked aggressively when one of the men gestured at it. Through the window, I saw Diane standing near the sidewalk, filming everything on her phone. Something didn't feel right. The uniforms lacked identification numbers. The vehicles didn't have any official logos on the sides. The guy handling the dog was wearing sneakers instead of tactical boots. In my dad's 3 decades on the police force, he taught me how to spot genuine authorities. I made up my mind the moment one of the men turned on his electric saw. I grabbed my phone and dialed the head of police, in this case, my dad. Dad, something really weird is happening here, I quickly explained as I watched the men setting up their equipment around the gate. Stay inside. I'll be there in 5 minutes, my dad replied, his tone as firm as it always had been in his 30 years on the force. Exactly 8 minutes later, 3 police cars arrived with their sirens on. My dad, Chief William Anderson, stepped out of the first car, flanked by Officers Scott and Brian. I watched on the security cameras as the look on the leader of this security team's face changed. Can I see your IDs and private security licenses? My dad calmly asked, as the other officers took strategic positions. The leader stuttered, We have authorization from the Homeowners Association to... I didn't ask about the HOA. I asked about your professional licenses and your authorization to operate as private security in Texas. They exchanged nervous glances. The dog, sensing the tension, started barking again. Does that animal have a security operations certification? Asked Officer Scott as he walked over to the driver. I opened the door and stepped into the yard just as my dad was checking the leader's ID documents. Robert Denton. Interesting. There's an outstanding warrant for your arrest on charges of ideological fraud in Travis County, my dad said. And this isn't the first time I've seen you posing as security, from what I can tell. The officers began handcuffing the men while Diane, still filming, tried to back away discreetly. Officer Brian approached her. Ma'am, we need you to stay here. We have some questions about your authorization for this operation. That Saturday, which began with uniformed men trying to take down my gate, ended with them being hauled off in police cars. The neighborhood, which had been quiet because of the holiday, was now buzzing with activity. Neighbors hurried out of their houses, some still clutching barbecue spatulas to see what was going on. After coordinating the arrest of the fake security team, my dad walked up to Diane with a look I remembered well from my teenage years. It was the kind of look you give in serious situations, a mix of unyielding authority and deep disappointment. Ms. Hartman, I need you to explain exactly what authority you think you have to send armed men to invade private property and destroy personal belongings, he said, his calm voice contrasting sharply with the gravity of the situation. Diane, now without her cell phone, which Officer Brian had taken as evidence, crossed her arms defensively. I'm just enforcing our association's rules. As the HOA president, it's my responsibility to... Your responsibility is to follow the law, my dad interrupted. And right now, I'm seeing several potential criminal violations, including misuse of funds to hire unlicensed people posing as security agents, attempted property destruction, intimidation, and possible fraud. I had never seen Diane at a loss for words. Her eyes darted around as if she were looking for an escape. Finally, she found her voice, albeit in a much less commanding tone. You don't understand. All of this is to maintain property values. That gate is an eyesore that lowers the value of every house around it. Officer Scott came up holding Diane's cell phone. Chief, we found several messages exchanged with this Robert Denton guy. She specifically requested that the operation be conducted during the holiday to minimize witnesses. An hour later, Diane was taken to the police station, not handcuffed, but visibly shaken, for a formal statement. My dad assured her she would be treated respectfully, but made it clear the charges were serious. Meanwhile, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The condo group chat, normally reserved for garage sale announcements or alerts about missed deliveries, was flooded with questions, reports, and videos of the incident. Is it true that Diane hired thugs to take down your gate? Does anyone know if HOA funds were used for that? We're having an emergency meeting tonight at the community center. Everyone should be there. The most surprising message came from Tom Morgan, the HOA secretary, a 60-year-old man who rarely participated in online discussions. As a board member, I am deeply disturbed by today's events. I officially call for an extraordinary meeting tomorrow at 6 p.m. Every homeowner's presence is vital. It's time for complete transparency. That night, as I sat on the porch with my dad sipping whiskey after a long day, I realized that something fundamental had changed in our community. "You know, son," he said, staring into his glass, "in 3 decades of enforcing the law, I've learned that small tyrants thrive when good neighbors stay silent. What happened today is about something way bigger than just a gate." The community center had never been this packed. Out of the 87 houses in the condo, representatives from at least 70 attended the extraordinary meeting. People who'd never bothered showing up for a meeting were now there, some even canceling work appointments to be present. Faces I'd only ever seen in passing on my way to work were now gathered together, sharing stories and voices full of indignation. Tom Morgan kicked off the meeting with a preliminary report. While Diane stayed at home on bail, the internal investigation was already uncovering some alarming issues. As secretary, I must report that there was never any board vote on any of these actions. In fact, the official minutes from the past 6 months appear to have been substantially edited. Roberto Hernandez, the treasurer and a 65-year-old retired accountant, stood up with a thick folder of documents. "I conducted a preliminary audit of the association's accounts after yesterday's events. I found significant expenses labeled as community infrastructure improvements that I can't tie to any known project." He projected a chart on the wall. $25,082 in undocumented expenses over the past 5 months. "Strange," Roberto continued. "This period coincides exactly with the massive remodel that Ms. Hartman did on her kitchen and bathrooms. It was like a dam had burst. Every little injustice, abuse, and occasional intimidation that once seemed like just annoying inconveniences now painted a clear picture of systematic abuse of power." The vote was unanimous. 70 votes to remove Diane from the presidency, 0 against, not even a single abstention. For the first time in our association's history, a president was removed before her term was up. "We also need to officially file a complaint with the authorities," Tom suggested. "Misuse of funds is a criminal matter, not just an administrative one," Roberto added, "and we should consider civil action to recover the funds that were misappropriated." As the meeting went on, with the election of an interim president and the formation of a special audit committee, I realized that my little gate had inadvertently opened the floodgates for something much bigger. It wasn't just about physical structures, it was about restoring the framework of our community. On my way home, several neighbors who'd never spoken to me stopped and thanked me. An elderly lady shook my hand with a surprising grip. "You did what many of us have been wanting to do for months. You didn't back down." The following weeks brought an avalanche of developments. Shortly after our community meeting, the County Financial Investigations Department launched a formal inquiry into the use of HOA funds. 2 investigators, armed with search warrants, spent an entire afternoon gathering financial records, meeting minutes, and computers from the association's office. Meanwhile, Diane had completely withdrawn. The shutters on her house stayed closed both day and night. She only drove when absolutely necessary. The few neighbors who saw her mentioned a remarkable transformation. Her once perfect hair was now unkempt, and her once imposing posture had been replaced by slumped shoulders. Then, one Wednesday morning, an unexpected twist happened. I opened my inbox and found an email titled, "The Truth About the Conspiracy Against Me. Please share." Sent to everyone on the mailing list, it contained an extensive manifesto from Diane. "I'm being victimized by a conspiracy, orchestrated by forces that want to devalue our community," the email began. "As a dedicated HOA president, I've always acted solely in the best interest of preserving property values. Mr. Anderson's gate was merely the last straw in a larger plan to turn our elegant condo into a chaotic housing complex." The email continued with increasingly out-there accusations, suggesting that I had connections with developers looking to buy rundown houses, and that my dad, as police chief, was abusing his authority to intimidate an innocent woman who was just doing her job. The community's reaction was swift. Instead of winning support, the email only reinforced the perception that Diane had lost touch with reality. In less than an hour, the condo group chat was filled with incredulous responses. That same afternoon, Diane ramped up her campaign on social media, by creating a page called Justice for HOA Administrators, where she shared her edited version of the events, complete with photos of my gate that were manipulated to look like a medieval fortress. As her digital crusade gained traction, the financial investigation moved methodically forward. Roberto and the audit committee uncovered a sophisticated pattern of misappropriation. Small amounts from various reserve funds were regularly transferred into an operating account and then to contractors who had worked on Diane's house. The total amount now exceeded $37,000. She was clever, Roberto explained during our update meeting. She never used large sums that would immediately raise red flags. Always small, disguised as legitimate community services. On the same day these findings were presented to investigators, I received a legal notice. Diane had filed a defamation lawsuit against me, claiming $150,000 in damages to her professional reputation. My lawyer, a longtime friend of my dad's, looked over the case and smiled. "This is what we call an imminent boomerang," he explained. "She just opened the door for full judicial discovery, which means we can now legally request all of her personal records, communications, and financial documents related to this case." 3 weeks later, the preliminary hearing was brief but decisive. Faced with preliminary financial evidence and transcripts of the communications with the fake security team, the judge not only dismissed the defamation suit, but also referred the case for a potential investigation into bad faith litigation. The next day, a for sale sign appeared in Diane's front yard. The community watched with interest as real estate agents came and went from the house. One of them, known to several neighbors, casually remarked that there were significant disclosure issues related to the property, given the owner's involvement in an ongoing investigation. During this period, something extraordinary began happening in the condo. Regular HOA meetings, which used to be sparsely attended, were now drawing dozens of residents. Volunteer work groups formed to review and overhaul the rule manual, making it clearer and fairer. Families that barely knew one another started socializing. 2 months after the gate incident, when the first spring flowers began to brighten the gardens, I received a formal envelope from the county district attorney's office. Diane had accepted a judicial settlement, full restitution of the misappropriated funds plus interest, a permanent resignation from any homeowners association positions, and 18 months of probation. In exchange, she would avoid a full criminal trial. That same week, her house was sold for 15% below market value to a young couple with 2 small kids. Word on the street was that Diane was moving to a gated community in Arizona, where, ironically, the rules are known for being exceptionally strict. Subscribe to the channel and hit like for more stories like this. Spring gave way to summer, and summer to fall. Nearly a year after I installed my controversial gate, our condo transformed in ways no one could have predicted. 3 houses on my street now had gates similar to mine. Not out of rebellion, but out of necessity. A string of petty thefts in the areas near the mall made many residents rethink their security. The gate that Diane had once called an aesthetic eyesore that would lower property values was now seen as a smart, even desirable improvement. Martha Schaefer, that friendly 78-year-old lady, was the first to install hers. "After seeing how well it worked for you, I realized it was exactly what I needed," she said, inviting me over for tea on her porch. "My grandkids can play in the yard without me worrying about strangers using my entrance for maneuvers." The new HOA board, with Tom Morgan as interim president, completely overhauled the association's guidelines. The new manual, approved by a record 82% turnout of homeowners, set out clear principles instead of arbitrary rules. Our goal is to create a safe, welcoming, and aesthetically pleasing community, while respecting each homeowner's individuality and rights, said the new preamble. The changes included term limits for board members, transparency requirements for all financial decisions, and a clear appeals process for contesting fines or notices. One particularly pleasant October Sunday, we held our first annual community festival. The community center and the adjacent park were transformed with food stalls and kids' games, plus a small stage for local talent to perform. Sofia Ramirez and her daughter performed a violoncello duet that earned enthusiastic applause from neighbors who, just a year ago, wouldn't have even allowed the instrument to be played outside. Gerald Wilkins, the widower whose memorial bench for his late wife had been removed, now chaired the newly formed Community Beautification Committee. Under his guidance, a small memorial garden was set up in the park where residents could plant flowers in memory of loved ones. The first installation was a new bench with a golden plaque, in memory of Eleanor Wilkins, whose love nurtured not only her family but an entire community. James and Paul, the couple who had faced resistance at their housewarming party, We're now organizing a monthly rotating dinner group among the houses, strengthening bonds among neighbors who hardly knew each other before. As for the shopping center that inadvertently sparked the whole saga, we reached a mutually beneficial agreement. After negotiations facilitated by the new HOA board, the mall management installed clear signs directing visitors to the proper parking areas, and even funded part of a small landscaped barrier to clearly mark where their property ended and our condo began. The final irony came when our community was featured in a local newspaper report about innovations in condo governance. The article cited our case as an example of how a crisis can catalyze positive change in community dynamics. The reporter interviewed several residents, including Martha, who gave her characteristically straight-shooting perspective. Sometimes you need a storm to clear the air. We had a backyard tyrant disguised as a president, and it took a young guy with guts to take her on. Now we don't just have prettier gates, we have a real community. On a quiet autumn afternoon, almost exactly 1 year after the incident that transformed our condo, I found myself sitting on my porch watching golden leaves gently fall. My dad, who had come to our new monthly community dinner, joined me with a cup of coffee. "You know what I've learned after all these years enforcing the law?" he mused, watching kids playing freely in the condo streets. A rarity before the change. Systems are important, but people are even more important. Rules exist to serve the community, not the other way around. I nodded, watching a new neighbor pass by my once controversial gate, waving cheerfully. It's funny, because all I ever wanted was to keep strangers from using my entrance for maneuvers. My dad smiled, his eyes reflecting 6 decades of wisdom. That's how it works. Sometimes small decisions open the gates for big changes. You didn't just protect your property, you helped an entire community rediscover its voice. As the sun started to set, lighting up the many gates that now adorned our condo with a golden glow, I realized that true security never comes from the physical barriers we build, but from the community bonds we form when we stand firm in defense of what's right. Subscribe to the channel and hit like for more stories like this.